Number 10. The Sins of Our Fathers. Law & Order is not just a hit drama from the 90s with a killer soundtrack, but something that started with the civilizations a very long time ago. King Hammurabi and his code of law comes to mind. But today, we're talking about ancient Persia. We're talking about a corrupt judge named Sisimons. After taking a bribe and delivering a not-so-unbiased verdict, the king found out and was most displeased. This is one of the worst things to do to another human being, but poor Sisimons was flayed. Or in simpler terms, they done skinned that feller alive. To make an unholy situation even more uncomfortable, they made a chair and used his hide as a material, and made his son sit in the flesh chair to make his own judgments. Can't help but think that you'd be sitting there all day thinking of dear old dad because you're sitting on top of a chair that's kind of fuzzy, because dad had a lot of back hair. Yikes. Number 9. The Annual Purge. I don't know about you folks at home, but I love the holiday season. For me specifically, Christmas. And to me, the meaning of Christmas is something less to do with religious background, but just good cheer. Spending time with loved ones and friends, and really enjoying a nice homemade meal. I mean, come on, turkey with the stuffing. Can't go wrong there. And honestly, you can't beat a good stuffing. I love it! But looking back at ancient Persia, there was a different kind of holiday. One that also has its roots in less about religion and more about cold-blooded killings. There were Zoroastrian priests called the Magi, and although they weren't Persian, they were somewhat respected in Persian culture. But when a plot to overthrow the king was enacted, the Persians were not too happy, and slaughtered the people responsible for the coup. But just for good measure, they also slaughtered all the other priests in the palace. Okay, but they might have missed some outside in the city and they had to get them too. You know what, how about every year on this day we go on a Magi hunt? So it became a holiday. Every year on the day of the coup, there was a grand feast and then a hunt for the remaining survivors. That's really comforting, that's nice. Number 8. Poaching. It's 2021. We all know it's super uncool to poach. Illegally hunting endangered species for fun, or just one sought after piece of the animal like elephant tusks for ivory. Our Persian friends of the past just might have been partaking in the poaching of rhinos. While in the ancient world the laws of today were not around to protect animals, the reason was still there, and people wanted horns. For some reason, however, people thought that rhino horn held the power to purify water. Thus, it was used to detect poisonous liquids. It's a superstitious belief that actually would be carried on for a very long time. Rhino horn did have other uses in civilizations, but I like to think it was a coolness factor. You can't tell me drinking wine out of a hollowed out horn isn't cool, come on.
Number 7. Ancient Curse. When officials found the tomb of Ankh-Mahor, aka a pharaoh official from 4,000 years ago, they also happened to find a curse. Yeah, for real, this one was written on the wall, right there. That's how you know that you're screwed. Buried in Mastaba, an above ground massive tomb held this warning. It reads, "Might do against this, my tomb, the same shall be done to your property." And it also warns of Ankh-Mahor's knowledge of secret spells and magic, and it threatens to fill impure intruders with a fear of seeing ghosts. So if you enter this tomb, you magic, you might see some ghosts, I don't know, I'd be out of there comedically fast. You would read that and then look down and my shoes would be left there, that's it. I would be gone, my shoes would be left. Like a cartoon. Number 6. Celtic Warrior Shield. Now this one was referred to as the most important British Celtic art object of the millennium, so yeah, not a bad title, I guess. That's pretty cool. An ancient Iron Age chariot burial was discovered in Yorkshire a few years ago. And our researchers were actually excavating a house development in Pocklington. They didn't mean to find this, but then all of a sudden they find a soldier's tomb. And they're like, all right, I guess that's lunch. Are we rich? I don't know. The soldier was laid on a chariot. It was beautiful, but he had a Celtic shield laid over top. Now this shield was also dated back to 175 BC. A lot of history, lots to unpack here in an accidental tomb finding. First of all, most Iron Age shields up until this point didn't have a scalloped edge, but for some reason this one here did. We thought metal shields were only used for ceremony, but this one's been used in combat. It's been repaired and then used again, it seems. There are clear sword marks around the shield, each that tell a story. Yeah, let's just go poke around a Celtic warrior's tomb. What could possibly go wrong? Sure. Number 5. The Sitting Man. Back in 2005, researchers found a Mayan tomb in Honduras dating to around 650 AD. And the body was not lying down, it was actually sitting upright in a chair. Yeah, again, I would run out of that tomb comedically fast. This man was an elite member of the Mayan Empire, it seemed. He had passed away around 650 AD, and his legs were crossed, and he was rocking jade jewelry. It was a beautiful setup. The tomb had also been positioned upright, like I said, and these types of tombs, they're quite rare to find, but the fact that this one also had somebody occupying it, still sitting up, still cross-legged with their jewelry, that's beautiful. It's double rare. Usually people come in and grave rob. This is lovely. Would you ever walk into a tomb? Sound off below. This is a terrifying job. We have home funerals today that are kind of similar to this. I saw a post recently on Reddit where a guy, instead of an open casket, he was just sitting on the couch with his clothes on, like dead, as if he was still alive. And that's an interesting way to do a funeral. I don't know. It's kind of like ancient Egyptian, kind of terrifying. I don't know how I feel about it. Number 4, Paris Catacombs. Of course we have to mention these ones, so haunting. Have you seen As Above, So Below? Yeah, I'm never visiting this place. These catacombs date back to the late 1700s and they're literally full of bones. So it's no surprise that some entrances and compartments have been blocked off, ideally, hopefully, forever. The catacombs' history is pretty twisted, it's pretty sick. When the city's cemeteries were filling up, and I mean that in a literal sense, officials began moving bodies all over the city, just trying to spread them out, just off the roads ideally, maybe, and hopefully to these abandoned mines. Eventually those started filling up and now we don't know what to do. But the catacombs did open in 1809, so, you know what? What a fun family excursion we have now. Let's go see the whole maze of bones. All these bodies that were occupying the land, they just stacked them up. Now it's a tourist attraction. I feel sick to my stomach. They designed the catacombs with the walls of skulls to ensure that visitors would meditate on the idea of death. Lovely, let's go home. I'm terrified.
Number 3. Here comes the boy. So after a failed attack on Greece, Persia was kinda down about that. No money in the treasury meant that the once great Persian Empire was on the decline. So what better time to invade? And that's just what Alexander the Great did. Through a very lengthy campaign that lasted 10 years and a very formidable fighting force, most likely the strongest ever at the time, he shattered the declining Persian Empire. He even managed to capture the city of Babylon. Talk about kicking a guy while he's down. His rule of the Persian Empire unfortunately was short-lived, as he died not too long after that at the ripe old age of 32. Boy, I sure hope I lived to the ripe age of 32. Number 2. The protection of Meow. Before the Persian Empire was no more, they were actually a very powerful empire. So powerful that they wanted a piece of Egypt. This war may have also been started by an insult from the pharaoh, but expanding was probably more likely. What makes this war so notable is the absolute five-head play by Persia. Persia knew of the Egyptian culture and knew about their idolization of cats. So, to aid them in the invasion, the king advised them to use kitty power. Soldiers were painting cats in the god Bastet in order for Egyptians to not dare destroy an image of their god. More ridiculous than that was the use of live cats. Stray cats were rounded up and kept during battle in order to prevent the very lethal arrow fire. Soldiers still died in battle, but it is said that the cats gave enough of an advantage for there to be a Persian victory. Decent. Number 1. Progressive for the time. Looking back in time, we can all acknowledge that maybe we weren't so nice, and as time has moved on, we've gotten more progressive. When you think of ancient empires, you don't really think of progressive, but surprisingly Persia was for the time. Specifically women's rights. Women were free to move about. They were allowed to work and be higher ups and manage. But probably the most important aspect was the right to own business and property, which their European counterparts simply could not do. Look at you, Asian Persia, way to go, look at you!
Number 10, not all looks. History is written by the victors. In this case, the Romans, who liked to paint Cleopatra here as a sinful seductress in the night. And in a lot of our media, she is portrayed just that way. But that may have not been totally the case. At least, she wasn't all looks. According to historians, she was a scholar, and she enjoyed the company of other scholars. She probably knew a dozen different languages, and she was well versed in mathematics, philosophy, oratory, and astronomy. If that weren't enough, apparently it's possible she wasn't actually as attractive as we think. A lot of coins and some art display her with somewhat masculine features. I mean, maybe that was considered attractive. But some people believe these coins just show these features to make her look more powerful, as most rulers back in the day were men. She was a female pharaoh of Egypt. There's only a slim chance she was not an incredibly intelligent person. We just don't know for sure.
Number 9, the last pharaoh of Egypt. She was the last pharaoh of Egypt, and what may come as a surprise to some, she wasn't actually Egyptian. Okay, yes, she was born in Egypt, but she was of Macedonian descent. However, what's more mysterious than that is her passing. After a bunch of political misfortune that I'm sure Adam will get into at a later point, the last pharaoh that we knew, she was about to lose her kingdom, so in true dramatic form, she allowed two asps to bite her, releasing her from this mortal realm. This may or may not be true, something that has been spun up since her absence. Sure, there's truth in everything, but we'll never really know. One thing's for sure, she was a cunning leader and did whatever it took to be a leader.
Number 8. Sibling rivalry. Look, back in the day, power was something that drove people to do some not so savory things. Like turning on your brother husband and starting a civil war for sole possession of the throne, teaming up with the ruler of a much stronger empire, and taking out anyone who was your potential rival. And I don't mean taking them out on a date. Cleopatra may or may not have had a hand in the untimely demise of her first and second brother husbands, Ptolemy the 13th and 14th. The first for not letting her have full power, and the second one so that she could make her son co-ruler. But it doesn't stop there. She was almost definitely responsible for the execution of her sister Arsinoe. Brother husbands and non-accidental fatal incidents. I'm not really a fan of this.
Number 7, Marvin's room. Hey man, it's okay. We've all been there. We all felt that kind of hurt before. You're drunk, it's 3 a.m. in a big city with lights. She hurt you bad, dude. But you should just call her. Just see if she picks up. Maybe you shouldn't. Maybe you should get really drunk and then come up with a solution and then see if it still sounds like a solid plan in the morning when you're sober. Yeah, when ancient Persians had a big decision to make, they used dad wisdom. Get super drunk and then think about critical events in life that require tough decision making. And when you're sober in the morning, do it drunk, you thought. Being honest was a big part of Persian culture. And when are people at their most honest? So the theory kind of makes sense to me. I just know that when I wake up in the morning after nurturing a case of beer, that last night's thoughts don't always translate well in the morning. Number 6. The land of milk and honey. Another creative punishment for the people who want to lose sleep tonight. A punishment for crimes Persians had come up with was scapism. This is where the Persians would feed a convicted criminal milk and honey. Sounds awesome, right? Well, not exactly. See, they entrapped the person between two boats. And every day they would force feed someone milk and honey. Milk and honey, milk and honey. Over and over and over again. Also, slathering the mixture of the two on the poor helpless criminal. As time went on, flies and bugs would find themselves interested in a sweet smelling crook. As one must also use the bathroom after all that beautiful rich consumption. A true horror to see, but after enough time, the person who was unlucky enough to be in such a position slowly and painfully died in a bog of their own filth and rodent infested area. Most likely dying of septic shock. I don't even have a joke for this one. This is something that should just be in the next Saw movie. Ugh. Number 5. Ashes to ashes. Here's another fun punishment. Man, these guys are really creative. This one is mentioned in the Bible, so you know it's gonna be good. Basically, the Persians built a tower, and it was filled with ash. Drop criminals into the ash tower, or there were 2 large paddles connected to the turning wheels outside that would churn the ash and victim inside, suffocating on the hot ash, making for a hot and dusty storm of hell and unholy foulness I can't even begin to describe. Like most things in history from this time, it has to be taken with a grain of salt. It could be very true, or not so true, as the Persian Empire did not leave us with much, and most knowledge of them comes from Greeks and Greek historians. But like most stories, there's truth in everything, and if that's even close to the truth, well, that's just not right, man. Number 4. This is Sparta! Despite what a 2006 movie with spray-on abs might mislead you, the Battle of Thermopylae was no laughing matter. It pitted the very brave Spartans against the Persian invaders, and there were a lot of them. Like, really a lot of them. Attack after attack after attack, the Persians were not getting anywhere. It wasn't until one of the Greeks betrayed the Spartans by leaving the Persians on a flank that would result in the destruction of the Spartans. Although the Persians were victorious, it was in a sense a Pyrrhic victory, as the loss of life on the Persian side far outnumbered the deaths of the Spartans. It's a battle that would be remembered for its bravery, and enough to have a movie made about it many, many years later. Number 3. Theatrics. When I was a young lad in every classroom I was ever in, the teacher, no matter how young or old, had a variation of this to say to me. Nice teachers would say this: Andrew, you have a lot of energy. Let's try and focus. The mean teachers would say, shut up and read your book. What am I getting at here? Well, in my mind, just because it was math class, that didn't mean it wasn't a stand-up comedy stage. Just how it goes. Cleopatra also felt this in her heart. No, not comedy, theater, or drama, just being extra, very extra. The whole revealing yourself by unraveling a rug is the definition of theater. There's also the whole Elizabeth Taylor connection. If you've ever seen the movie Cleopatra with Elizabeth Taylor, then you know what I'm talking about. This also could be directly because of that, and for those who think Cleopatra, they probably think of Elizabeth Taylor, which is very,
Number 2. Forever young. You know, for all the things she did and who she was in history, Cleopatra did not live an incredibly long life. She actually only lived to be 39, dying in 30 BC. She brought the end of an era, one that had been around since 3100 BC. The line of pharaohs was Egypt's way of life for over 3,000 years, and Cleopatra left us only 2,051 years ago. This isn't so much a mysterious point about Cleopatra, it's more like a mysterious point about Egypt and pharaohs in general. What is cool is that for the last 300 years before Cleopatra VII, her family had spoke only Greek, and the very last one in their line, the very last pharaoh of Egypt who closed out a 3,000-year-long tradition, was the first and last Ptolemaic ruler who decided to actually learn how to speak Egyptian and who embraced the Egyptian culture that she was the ruler of.
Number 1, rumors and hearsay. Look, we've talked about a lot of stuff here on this list, but the trouble is we can't be too sure of what is true and what's Hollywood. The classical historical equation of a long time ago plus not enough primary sources of information multiplied by 2 cute internet hosts, well, we just don't know. We'd love to bring you the cold hard history facts with just a sprinkle of funny in there, but this list was difficult. So if you guys know anything about Cleopatra and her mysteries, please share. I'd love to hear it. Let us know in the comments below. But the truth is, there's just a lot of mystery surrounding the gal. That's just how it goes.
Kicking off the list at number 10, got a passport. Ramses II is known as one of the greatest ancient Egyptian rulers of all time. He was called Ramses the Great, so that's a good sign already. At a young age, he fought in harsh battles to protect the borders of Egypt, and during his reign, the Egyptian army reached 100,000 men. That's a pretty large army. He was later referred to as the Great Ancestor, and it didn't take long for Ramses II to declare himself a god. It's always fun being like, hey, by the way, I'm a god now. That's how cool I am. 30 years into his ruling, Ramses was ritually turned into an Egyptian god. It was a formal thing, though it wasn't until 3,000 years later until Ramses would truly soar through the skies. He was buried in his treasure after 96 years of living, and in 1974 he finally started to show signs of aging. Not too bad. He went from being on display to being sent to Paris to get a glow up, to preserve the king's body even longer. Instead of being listed as luggage on the way to Paris, the pharaoh was given an official Egyptian passport for the commute. The government gave a mummy a passport. This is like the first 5 minutes of a horror film. Under occupation, it even said king. And there was even a small disclaimer noting that he was in fact still dead. You can never be too sure, Number 9. Baboon tattoos. Ancient Egyptians worshipped animals. This is common knowledge now at this point. We've heard about their love towards cats, which I'll explain later on, but what about baboons? Yeah, they were pretty important pieces to this ancient puzzle as well. Some mummies were found with tattoos of baboons on their bodies. Now, one of the most strange things that pharaohs did back in ancient Egyptian days was train baboons to make arrests. Imagine stealing a pair for your family and then 4 baboons start doing parkour chasing you down. That's so alarming. I would just throw it and be like, please stop! You're so scary and strong. They trained baboons to pick fruit, they trained them to make beer, and they also trained them to entertain. Yeah, these baboons were the life of the party. Their dance moves alone would be reason enough to tattoo one on my arm. So you know what? I get it. Get a Harambe tattoo. I'm like, I see it. I see the similarities. Number 8, worship dung beetles. So worshipping a baboon that dances and makes holiday ales, yeah, I can see how one would worship such a creature. That makes sense. But pharaohs also worship dung beetles, and their reasoning may surprise you. Dung beetles, also known as scarabs, are the only species in the entire world that follows the Milky Way naturally. Animals are born with natural instincts. Sea turtles race to the sea. These guys follow the cosmos. It's pretty wild. It's one thing to follow the sun naturally because it gives off warmth. Sunflowers will literally turn their head to find the sun, which is super creepy, but it's beautiful. These insects would follow the line of the Milky Way and then roll their poop towards it. They'd be like, hello Milky Way, and they just... Hieroglyphs of these beetles are seen all over. Like near the sacred lake at the Temple of Karnak, for example, there's a massive scarab monument. And today, if you walk around it 9 times, you get good luck. And don't worry, you don't have to roll any droppings at the same time. Don't get dizzy, that's all, it's the only rule. The scarab is there to represent the god Khepri, which ancient Egyptians believed was the sun. I grew up thinking the sun was a baby, but that's because I watched Teletubbies, so, depends.
Number 7, bedtime with Caesar. When I said she was a cunning warrior and would do whatever it takes to be a great leader, I meant it. Cleopatra knew how to control the politics around her and the men who held power. She gave the thing that all men can't resist. Yes, that's right. Throwing rocks in a river. It's our favorite pastime. We just love doing it. I don't know. I'm just kidding. It was actually all the other stuff like wealth, power, and the devil's bedroom dance. You know what I'm talking about. Cleopatra had the men wrapped around her finger. All was going great if it weren't for a little political strife in Rome. She ended up with Mark Antony, then Octavian, aka Augustus. He was on the rise to power when the curtains closed, a republic had fallen, and an empire was here to stay for a long time. Long enough for a whiny teenager from Tashi Station to destroy a space station. Or something like that.
Number 6. Trendsetter. Maybe you knew, maybe you didn't, but in 44 BC, Cleopatra went back to Rome with Julius Caesar as his not-so-subtle side chick, bringing their not-so-subtly named son, Caesarion, with them. And while he was totally with Calpurnia at the time, he even built a statue for Cleopatra in the Temple of Venus. This was pretty scandalous and had a lot of people doing the side-eye emoji, but it also had a lot of people being like, damn, look at this Egyptian lady, look at her style, her hair, her clothes. Our girl Cleopatra had an impact on the fashion in Rome, even if she was only there for 2 years until her mans got punctured like a fresh new bubble tea, except he was punctured 22 more times.
Number 5, Isis Reborn. The Greeks called her Acid. She is an acid. I don't know. God of the Moon, the goddess of life and magic, a protector to women and children. Yes, the goddess of the moon was quite important to Egyptian mythology. What if you could convince the people that you were a god? What if you were actually the goddess of magic and healing and a protector of the women and children? Anyone who works for PR can tell you how important self-image is, especially when you're the gal in charge. Statues of the goddess Asit were made in Cleopatra's likeness, and her public image became that of an all-important goddess. I wish I was the goddess of healing and magic, but I'll settle for King of the Hive.
Number 4, drinking buddies. So, after her last Roman boyfriend got, Cleopatra found a new lover in the Roman general Mark Antony. While it was a political move to have protection, it was also because they genuinely enjoyed each other's company. They even had a drinking club, which honestly would be kind of cute if it wasn't for the scandals and war, and honestly pretty much everything else. The inimitable livers is what they called themselves, and they spent the winter of 40 and 41 BC living it up, drinking and feasting almost every night. They had games and contests, and apparently these two lovebirds would dress up in disguises and go out into Alexandria and play pranks on people. Now that is actually pretty cute, I won't lie. Pretty cute.
Number 3, ancient Photoshop. When we look back at ancient artwork, we see these kings and queens and they look athletic. They look to be in great shape, when in reality, these pharaohs were probably quite obese. I mean, think about it. If you slam wine and bread all day and you have baboons dancing around, plus a little dab of honey every, 8 minutes, yeah, you're gonna gain some weight. Many of these ancient pharaohs had diabetes, and Queen Hatshepsut, who was alive during the 15th century BC, her sarcophagus shows her as slim and strong, but historians all agree that she was out of shape and extremely unhealthy. Honestly, I would do the exact same if I was there back then. She was ahead of her time. If somebody made a statue for me, I'd be like, yeah, give it an 8-pack, make him extremely jacked and 7'2". Can we do that? Sure, no one's gonna ask questions. I'm Dwayne The Rock Johnston, just write it down, please. Number 2, worshipped cats. I am allergic to cats, but I still love them. I still pet them. I ruin my entire night just to get my face right there next to their cute little furry face. But ancient Egyptians, like I said earlier, really loved cats. They respected them, they worshipped them. Even though at the time dogs were respected for being hunters, cats were still considered magical creatures. So if there's ever a cat versus dog argument going on your end of the screen, cats win. I'm allergic and I'm still saying cats win. That's huge. If you had a cat, it means you had good luck. When cats passed away, they too were mummified back in the day. You would think that alone was plenty of respect, but ancient Egyptians and pharaohs went a step further. After their cat died, they would shave their eyebrows off and then mourn until they grew back. That's like 3.5 months of cat depression. That's wild. Next time your friend tells you that their cat passed away, tell them that if they really love them, they'll shave their eyebrows off and then see what they say. Also, you don't have to make your friends shave their eyebrows. Let's leave this one in the past. That's fun. Just be sad with eyebrows. Be like, Number 1, fight a hippo. Egypt's first pharaoh, Menes, although we know next to nothing about his history, there is something there that has historians scratching their heads to this day. At his early time, the pharaoh was setting out to unite all of Egypt under his rule. The time that he ruled as well is considered a rather peaceful time when comparing it to years later. We know that he was well respected, and we also know that after his 63 years of peaceful ruling, he was stomped to death by a hippo. That's horrible. It's a horrible way to go out. He was an elderly ruler at that time. He was surrounded by guards, and somehow a hippo got all the way to his chambers. A hippo, and then ended the pharaoh's life. Some suggest that the reason there's nothing written about this pharaoh's tragic, horrible demise is because it's possible that the hippo was his pet. This is why you don't try and tame a beast as a pet. Perhaps this was an early similar situation as the Siegfried and Roy tiger attack. Just stick to smaller magical cats. They're much safer. They won't stomp you to death. Oh my god, it's horrible. Number 10, Cleopatra the Seventh. Cleopatra is one of the most well-known names when it comes to ancient queens and kings of Egypt, but did you know that Cleopatra we're seeing referenced in numerous film adaptations was actually the 7th Cleopatra, not the 1st or 2nd or 3rd or 4th. 7th. Egypt's last active pharaoh, born in 69 BC, was the 3rd child to Ptolemy XII. The Ptolemaic dynasty, the Macedonian Greek royal family, originally had its ties to Alexander the Great, so they were ruling Egypt for a long time. Male rulers took the name Ptolemy and queens were, well, Cleopatra. Her lineage runs deep in the heart of Egypt, but Cleopatra, fun fact, was, number 9, not Egyptian. Sure, she may have been born in Egypt, but Cleopatra, despite what many believe, was not. She was the last Greek ruler of Egypt, and after Alexander the Great's death in 323 BCE, Ptolemy then took over Egypt, which in turn launched this wave, this dynasty of Greek rulers lasting for centuries. DNA-wise, she was barely Egyptian, but as she grew up, she was determined to learn Egyptian ways, and due to political structure, she started to style herself as the goddess Isis. She was the first Cleopatra that claimed to be Isis after the 3rd Cleopatra. Yeah, there's a lot more Cleopatras than you thought. Number 8. Family problems. When Ptolemy VII died back in 51 BC, naturally the throne was passed down to his son, Ptolemy VIII, and of course Cleopatra VII. So both children were assigned to the throne, Cleopatra only being 18 and her brother being 10 years old. So Cleopatra became the main bread and butter. She was the ruler, and in typical ancient fashion, the two had to get married. You gotta keep it in the family. A couple years passed, and with Cleopatra trying to run the show, little brother wasn't having it. Or rather, her husband and co-ruler wasn't having it. Eventually, Cleopatra was pushed out of Alexandria, and her greed for power over her little brother, equally a co-ruler, had her completely driven out. But don't fret, she's coming back to Alexandria soon, and she's got a really cool idea of how to sneak back in the front doors with her new man, but I'll get to that later on. Number 7, surprise each other. Cleopatra and Julius Caesar were a pretty beneficial couple, to say the least. Cleopatra would use Caesar's armies, which in turn would allow her to rule Egypt, while Caesar was eyeing down Cleopatra's extreme wealth. They were the perfect pair. She was able to financially support Caesar enough for him to return to power back in Rome, but how did such a perfect pair meet in the first place? Did Cleopatra swipe right? No. Well, a then 52-year-old Julius Caesar visited the much younger Cleopatra, so she then sent a surprise gift to his chambers. She got her crew to roll her up in a carpet or bed sheets, it's not really confirmed, something along those lines, and then delivered her to his door completely nude. He unraveled a naked Cleopatra and he's like, okay, hello. That's pretty impressive. Cleopatra was down for fun surprises. While we don't recommend this as an approach ever, it's one worth mentioning on our list. Number 6, gender reveal parties. We've all seen those videos. A guy goes to hit a baseball, he misses it, the baseball breaks and there's pink dust all around his feet and he starts crying. It's wonderful. Gender reveal parties were quite popular, until they started lighting wildfires. But back in the day, Egyptians had a pretty interesting method for predicting the gender of a newborn. Instead of peeing on a pregnancy test, you would have to use wheat and barley seeds instead. Depending on how those barley crops grew, they could accurately predict the sex of the child. They were right 85% of the time, which is quite impressive back in the day. We went from watering crops to burning them. Hashtag, it's a boy. Number 5, space knife. Only a few years after King Tut's tomb was discovered in the Valley of the Kings, archaeologist Howard Carter found 2 daggers that were buried with the king. Now, like I mentioned earlier, it's not uncommon to be buried with your treasure or belongings. It's why ancient Egyptians would build these tombs in a certain way, so grave robbers can't just sneak in after you pass away and then take all of your goodies. So 2 daggers were found with King Tut, one made of iron and the other with gold. Now, with iron being more rare than gold during the Bronze Age, this was quite a big deal. With recent advancements in technology, we're able to use a technique called portable X-ray fluorescent spectrometry, and according to the journal Meteorites and Planetary Science, the blade is actually made of iron, nickel, and cobalt, suggesting that its material is that of extraterrestrial origin. A blade fell from the sky and now a king has it. That's pretty insane. Also, aliens? Just saying. Number 4, KV 55. Also located in the Valley of the Kings in Egypt, Tomb 55, otherwise known as KV 55, was found by Edward Arton back in 1907. It was discovered right next to King Tut's tomb, and the reason that we call this tomb by a number rather than a name is because we really don't know for sure who's inside. Even the walls of the tombs inside, they aren't covered with beautiful hieroglyphs to tip us off on their history or their ruling, it's just bare. The only hint as to who is buried remains on the walls. It's one hieroglyph that remains, and it was discovered also in 1907, and it translates simply to, "The evil one shall not live again." That's very scary. That's definitely scarier than Greg was here. I don't know. Even massive stones were built and set up in order to prevent anything from getting out, whereas usually with ancient tombs it's the opposite, so that's pretty scary. The description for those inside the tomb has also been destroyed, so we have really no idea who's in KV 55. Or what. Number 3, Caesar and Mark Antony. We need to dive into detail about Caesar's death and what happened with Mark Antony. So when Cleopatra originally took Caesar's hand in 46 BC, it wasn't exactly chill. Caesar was very vocal about the fact that Cleopatra was his other lady, his other boo, and at one point Cleopatra and their son, Caesarion, came to visit him in the city, and he was pumped. He had the statue for her built right in the temple of the Venus Genetrix, and Romans were obviously upset, to say the least. They ended up stabbing Caesar to death in the Roman Senate in 44 BC, so just a couple of years after that. Her time with Caesar had long-term effects on the Romans, so women started to dress like her, so much so that now we're misidentifying Cleopatra's body many times over and over again because of this exact reason. Later in 41 BC, she met Mark Antony, and again, she made a dazzling entrance. She arrived on a golden barge equipped with oars made of pure silver and massive purple sails. You would see her coming. She was emulating a different goddess. This time around, she was going for the Aphrodite look, with attendants dressed up as Cupid fanning her down. So extra, what a diva. Well, not really a diva, rather what a planner, because Mark considered himself the embodiment of the Greek god Dionysus. 41 BC, their love life had now ignited, and again, she was being used for her riches, and he was being used to protect her crown. They lived a comfortable life full of lust and leisure for a bit. They actually made their own club, a drinking club named the Inimitable Livers. This was from 41 to 40 BC, and members of the club would partake in all these feasts and games, just wine everywhere, and after a few drinks, Cleopatra and Antony would disguise themselves and then go into the streets of Alexandria and prank locals. That's like when James Corden does the crosswalk musical thing, only I'd definitely rather watch these two. Number 2, her death. In 30 BC, Cleopatra and Antony took their own lives. This happened right after Octavian forces followed them to Alexandria. Now, one of the biggest questions to this day is just how Cleopatra herself met her fate. Now, it's been rumored for a while that a snake bite was the culprit. Cleopatra apparently allowed a poisonous snake to end her life, or was it something entirely different? Was she ahead of the game here too? Instead of a bite from an asp, Greek and Roman historians believe that she did even more here. It's theorized that she poisoned herself using toxins, and she herself administered the poison using a hairpin. So Antony fell onto his own sword, and Cleopatra poked herself with poison. Even the way these historical figures went out aligns with their personality and leadership. Because like I said off the top, Cleopatra was brilliant, specifically in chemistry. Nobody really knows, but this theory of her poisoning herself definitely checks out. But where's the body? Starting our list off at number 10, Newgrange. Heading over to the beautiful Ireland, kicking off this list. Newgrange is this massive circular tomb. It's an ancient mound, really, protruding from the earth. It's quite hard to miss. Now, the tomb is roughly 5,200 years old, meaning that this passage tomb in the Boyne Valley is older than Stonehenge and older than the Great Pyramids of Giza. That's pretty incredible. Stone Age farmers built this mound somehow, and is 85 meters in diameter and 13 meters high. Again, quite massive, hard to miss. A tomb that takes up an acre of space. Must be nice. Now, the passage and main chamber just happen to align with the rising sun on the mornings around the winter solstice. And if that's not fancy enough for you, the tomb is surrounded in a ring of large curbstones. There's actually 97 curbstones that surround Newgrange in total, and some of these are engraved with megalithic art. There's probably one that says Todd was here. Most likely. Number 9, the Animal Tombs. This tomb was found, of course, as you guessed, in the Valley of the Kings, but the name of the tomb is a number. What in the Elon Musk is happening? Who names their tomb a number? What? KV 52, that's the official name, and it was discovered in 1906 by Edward Ayrton. Tomb KB50, KB51, and of course this one, KB52, they all together form a group referred to as the animal tombs. Hidden underneath 6 feet of debris this entire time, the entrance to KB52 was finally found. So when we enter a tomb that had been untouched ideally for thousands of years, we could find anything, right? In fact, whatever they do find is a win. It helps complete this age-long puzzle of humans' history. So when officials opened KB52 and it was pretty much empty, yeah, that doesn't feel too nice. All this time, really? It's empty? There's no treasure? Are we sure? Empty except for 2 boxes, both black and undecorated, which is a little ominous. The larger of the 2 contained the remains of a monkey, and the smaller one was a canopic chest that had 4 compartments. Number 8. Luxor Tomb. We've been saying 2,500 years ago quite often when we refer to these tombs, and don't get me wrong, that's an awful long time. But in 2014, archaeologists discovered a 4,000-year-old tomb from the 11th dynasty. It was tucked away in Luxor, Egypt this whole time. We've missed it for so long. Spanish archaeologists found a tomb belonging to a leader from the 11th dynasty. Now, it's pretty obvious that this was somebody from the royal family or somebody who was a high-ranking official of some sorts, because Luxor was the capital city of ancient Egypt at the time, and given how this tomb looked when we found it, yeah, they were pretty important. Officials believed that the tomb could have been used as a mass grave due to the large amounts of human remains found inside. Now, it's important to note that this tomb had also been used during the 17th dynasty because tools and utensils from that time, which was way later on, was found in the same tomb. Yeah, we're gonna find a spork in that tomb in 5,000 years and be like, oh yes, more ancient tools. Number 7, love and power. It's often thought that Cleopatra just married her brothers, more than one, got power, and then charmed Caesar and Mark Antony, and then Bob's your uncle. Well, she wasn't really down for any of this. She didn't seek this lifestyle out per se, nor did her 10-year-old brother. I'm sure it wasn't ideal to be that stressed out when you're that young. I got a flat bike tire at 10. I didn't get Egypt. Know what I mean? Cleopatra once said as the goddess Isis, the most Egyptian of gods, married her brother Osiris, so in the process of becoming Egyptian, that is, becoming the ruling house of Egypt, although by lineage we were pure Macedonian Greek, we Ptolemies adopted some ancient Egyptian customs that others found shocking. One was brother-sister marriage, as the pharaohs had done earlier. Thus my mother and father were actually half-siblings, and I was forced in turn to marry my brothers, although it was a marriage in form only. Her relationship had true political advantage, but the way she felt about Julius Caesar was true. He had truly earned her love, not just lust. Not only would I never harm him, but I would kill anyone who tried to. Damn, ride or die. Nobody prepared me to feel so fiercely loyal to him and so instantly bound. Number 6, Julius Caesar. Nicknamed the Bald's Adulterer, which is now my new favorite diss ever, Julius Caesar had a history of his own, and his, rather than family and power, was lust. He was known to hook up with tons of people and to get them to fall in love with him just so he could use their power. So of course the 2 crossed paths. In October 50 BCE, Cleopatra had been kicked out pretty much of the family, so she fled to Syria, but she kept busy. She established an army and returned 2 years later to face her brother. At the same time now, the Roman general Pompey was taken out, plus the arrival of one Julius Adulterer Bald Caesar. The air was calm, it was peaceful for a hot minute, and Cleopatra knew that during this time, she needed all the support she could get, specifically now from the Romans. At the same time, Caesar was looking to collect debts from Cleopatra's father, so they both felt the need for each other in some way. It was a match made in heaven. Number 5, sneaking back in. The pair became lovers, and it may have been love at first sight. Remember Caesar's really cool nickname? Well, Cleopatra had some wild methods herself. You know, believing she was the goddess Isis, she tried to appear as the goddess on the regular, so she was committed. She made these dazzling entrances whenever she could, but in 48 BC, right when Caesar arrived in Alexandria, during that family feud with Ptolemy VIII, she wanted to meet the Roman general, but she didn't want to be seen, that would cause some drama. So she had herself wrapped up in a linen sack and then personally delivered to Caesar's bedroom, and then unraveled, and out comes Cleopatra. She won the heart of Rome's future dictator, and eventually she regained Egypt's throne. Nice. Her brother wasn't too fond of this alliance, of course, and in the following battle, Ptolemy drowned in the Nile, resulting in Cleopatra's true return to power. Number 4, watch the throne. Now this sounds like they would rule the world together, or they should have, but you know, Egyptian tradition already set her love life in stone. She had to marry her other brother, Ptolemy the, you guessed it, 9th. Caesar was already married, but that didn't really matter for the bald adulterer now, did it? Cleopatra and Julius did have a child, and following Caesar's assassination in 44 BC, Cleopatra had her brother, husband, and co-ruler killed. She's just taken out all of her family. This is crazy. But she did so to ensure that her own son, with Caesar, appropriately named Caesarion, would be the next in line for power. Her sister as well, she had a hand in her execution, Arsinoe. Doesn't matter if you're family or not, if you're a threat to her throne, you're getting diced. Number 3, Poland double tomb. All right, here we go, 2-in-1, time to get cozy. All around the world, there have been a handful of 2-person tombs discovered. Now, this is the only one that they found in Poland, so pretty impressive, have to mention it. Back in 2015, archaeologists discovered this 2,000-year-old necropolis that had been sitting there for centuries, just at peace. And then we came along with flashlights, and now we gotta open things up and lick rocks to see what year dates back to what and whose skull is whose, right? Whatever geologists do. Lo and behold, they were around 120 tombs in total. Yep, and now they're all awake. Awesome, here you go. Enjoy your resting, we're here now. Now you're a museum. They were used from the 1st century AD to the 3rd AD. Now among these 120 tombs were a 2-in-1, that stood out. Tombs that archaeologists referred to as princely. Pre-war's culture and Kujawi were in fact Celtic, so their burial process was also Celtic. Now it's a little odd to see a Stone Age Celtic necropolis in Poland, so yeah, it's like history just collapsed into one little ball, and then we found that ball and we're like, oh, what's in here? A lot of spiders, and let's get rich. Number 2, the tomb of User. Back in March 2010, the Egyptian Supreme Council of Antiquities released this photo. It was a 6-foot tall slab of pink granite, and it was carved over 3,500 years ago. The door was found near a Karnak temple in Luxor, and it originally belonged to the chief minister of Queen Hatshepsut many moons ago. Now User was a high-ranking official for over 20 years, so in turn he got his own fancy tomb located on the west bank of the Nile. Egyptians associate the west with the land of the dead, so that's why they're all over here. The actual slab of granite though, this door, it was found originally far away from its home. It had been moved thousands of years later, and somehow it ended up in an ancient Roman era building. Yeah, never thought I'd have to say this, people, but don't steal doors from the dead. That guy for sure got cursed. Okay. And finally, number 1, the Alexandria Black Tomb. Speaking of curses, this one's pretty heavy. We found a mysterious black granite tomb in Alexandria back in 2018. You probably remember this, right? And somebody thought it was a good idea to open it up. And it was exactly what we thought it was going to be. It was bones and sludge, and it smelled so bad everyone ran away. It was horrific. When archaeologists found this massive tomb, again, untouched for over 2,000 years, on one hand, sure, that's a great find. It's a fascinating discovery. Lovely, it's a feat in itself. But us humans, we're curious cats, right? We want to pop it open, see who or what is inside. What if it's Alexander the Great? What if it's treasure that they used to pay off everybody's student loans? Hey, who knows, right? Let's open it up. Egyptian news outlet El Watan reported that the tomb was lifted just a few centimeters before every official involved at the construction site fled the scene. Yeah, it smelled that bad. They had to run away. Mustafa Waziri, Secretary General of the Supreme Council of Antiquities, this man put his entire head in the tomb later on to show us that it is safe and not cursed. I mean, you can use your hand, you know what I mean? You can do this. You don't have to put your head in, you could just do the one hand thing. That works just as well. Maybe a foot, but straight to head dipping? Come on, Mr. Waziri, watch The Mummy, don't do this. Do you think this released a curse upon the world? Again, this was 2018, so I don't know, who knows? Sound off in the comments down below all your thoughts and concerns.